Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that's joining on, we will be starting here in just about 15 seconds. Give everyone a chance to jump in. Again, for those of you jumping in now, we'll get started in about 15 seconds. Thank you so much. In the meantime, enjoy our smiling faces. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate that. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. I keep saying morning. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us on today's webinar with Doug Beckley, the CEO of the Beckley Group and an expert in organizational leadership. In a few minutes, Doug will share strategies to be a successful leader in this ever-changing world we're currently living in. And this will be his second time doing it for us, so thank you, Doug. This webinar will offer guidance and information on effectively navigating your organization through the pandemic and beyond. This time requires business leaders to perform at their best, as you all know. Success is on the other side of this pandemic if we manage our time, our people, and our resources with intention, thoughtfulness, and impact. Before we get to that, though, I do want to take a moment to tell you about what the Vegas Chamber has been up to these past few months. The Vegas Chamber is working to get out the vote for candidates and issues that will impact our economic future. Last week, if you were on our newsletter and on our website, the Vegas Chamber released its comprehensive list of endorsed candidates. These candidates were interviewed by chamber members who serve on the Government Affairs Committee about issues that impact businesses and job creation. We encourage you to join us in supporting them, and you can find all of that information on our website at vegaschamber.com. As well as voting yes on ballot question 1. Again, all that information is on our website at vegaschamber.com. Additionally, we gained new partnerships with two organizations, one being Workforce Connections and the other one at US Bank. We introduced these partnerships because we want to ensure we're giving our members the best resources and as many resources as physically possible for your membership. The Employee Envy Business Hub, which is the partnership with Workforce Connections, is a one-stop shop to help businesses with their recruitment and hiring needs, including helping with tax credits and other government incentives for hiring new workers. We've had some pretty good success from this early on. If you are looking for employees currently, please go to our website at vegaschamber.com. On one of the tabs, you have Employee Envy Business Hub, or you can all reach out to me at wochoa, WOCHOA at vegaschamber.com, and I'll put that in the chat box as well. We also have a new partnership with US Bank that provides life coaches or goals coaches to our members and employees to help them reach professional and personal goals. And again, that one you can find on our website as well. And we're very, very excited for that opportunity. We'll continue to provide you with the information you need to support your businesses, and also we're always looking for ways that we can better serve you. So if there is something that we can do to better serve your needs, please let me know for sure. Now, we're at the Vegas Chamber, proud to have you as members, and we're very excited that you're here today. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today and fellow chamber member, Doug Beckley, the CEO of the Beckley Group. Doug?
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it. And I'll work on my smiling abilities soon. But it's great to be with you guys today. I really had a ball the last time that we did one of these for the chamber, and it was right in the middle of it was kind of April. So things were a little chaotic, and we talked about how to manage through disruption, through business disruption. And today, since we have a little bit more of our bearings, I wanted to talk about how do we engage people? How do we lead our teams and our employees effectively through this kind of fluid time that we're in? And I want to start by sharing a little bit of information with you, and then I'm going to share my screen and talk about the principles that we want to address today. But one of the things that I do as a management consultant is I read almost everything I can get my hands on when it comes to leadership, management practices, employee engagement, and probably the most credible and largest source of data for my company comes from an organization called the Gallup organization. They're kind of the world's largest management consulting firm, and they have done studies on employee engagement for many, many years. And right before the pandemic, they were measuring employee engagement in the U.S. workforce, and they found that it was at all-time highs in kind of February, March range. They resurveyed, and these are studies that are millions of interviews, companies, hundreds and hundreds of companies, and what they found was in just about July range is that employee engagement across the country has plummeted. Not a big surprise, but it plummeted and declined to a record low, the lowest point since Gallup began recording these figures. So when you talk about engagement, that's a real problem for all of you that are leading, managing, owning, operating organizations, large or small. The engines, the economic engine of an organization are the human beings. And so there's a direct link between employee engagement and business performance. My industry, guys that were consulting and coaching with clients, started to scramble around. What's going on, and how do we help our clients address this engagement crisis? And you probably saw the same emails and the same articles and the same talking heads that I did. And everybody in April and May was trying to come up with new strategies, a silver bullet for how do you manage people during a pandemic. There must be some sort of COVID-specific leadership strategy. And as the dust began to settle a little bit and the noise started to subside a little bit, what we have found, what leaders have found, is that the leadership practices that were important before this pandemic are now absolutely critical. The strategies didn't change, their importance did. And so I want to talk about what those strategies are. There are things that highly effective leaders do differently than everybody else. And I want to go through 4 of them today. I'm going to share my screen here and show a couple of slides. Will, can you guys see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I want to talk about, very simply, what do highly effective leaders do differently than everybody else? And when you talk about engagement and you look at the studies that I was just talking about, as I said, about 2/3 of our people are disengaged. Disengagement directly impacts. It actually can kill performance in an organization or a team. The other big finding of the research is that the primary driver of employee disengagement is ineffective management. But here's the irony. When you look at the studies, when you look at the employee engagement numbers, the most disengaged group of people are managers. It was the managers who had the lowest scores since this study started showing us what the different groups of engagement were. So that's kind of a vicious cycle, and we've got to figure out, how do we reverse this trend? And the way that we reverse this trend is by focusing on leadership practices from the very top position of the organization and cascading down. So effective management, effective leadership, which is the primary driver of good or bad, of good engagement, high engagement, has to start with that CEO and work its way down through the management levels of the organization. The question is, what are those practices? And I want to talk about those now, and 2 things that my clients hear me say all the time. One is, I'm not going to give you my opinion. I don't think you want my opinion. I don't think you want to know what Doug thinks about leadership. What I want to share with you today is, what do the experts tell us? What does the research tell us? What do we know for a fact that the country's greatest leaders do on a consistent basis differently than everybody else? And the other thing I'll ask my clients, if any clients are listening, is that you've heard this before. And so don't sign off, because what I want to say to people that have heard these principles before is now is the opportunity to truly apply them, to truly go deep with these principles. Take a look at your employees and your teams. Think about people that are struggling, that are disengaged, particularly problem employees or employees that are really having a tough time rising to the challenge. When you take a look at those folks, that's where these principles become most critical. And we want to really, really go deep with these ideas today. And there are 4 of them. And I'm going to jump right into the 4 practices of highly effective leaders. Number 1, they provide clear and compelling expectations. They are explicitly, almost uncomfortably clear and specific with their people about what is expected and about what success looks like. Number 2, once they let people know what's expected of them, they give them what they need to achieve those expectations. Empowerment's a buzzword that's almost lost its meaning. It's almost a cliche, but empowerment is the right word. We want to transfer power to our teams, to our people, so that they are able to be successful and achieve the expectations that we set forth in step 1. Once we've done that, then we have to talk to them. Then we have to keep an ongoing 2-way dialogue going with our people, with our teams. We have to talk frequently and talk in the right ways about performance. Employees need feedback. They grow and improve based upon feedback. And number 4, if we've done 1 through 3 properly, we've been clear about expectations, we've empowered people for success, and we've given them the appropriate level of feedback, we've got to make sure that we're holding them accountable for those results that we set forth in step 1. So the first principle, provide clear and compelling expectations. Very simple, very fundamental idea. However, a lot of us just don't do it. The studies tell us about half of us as leaders and managers don't do it. I have a client that is a construction company, and they a couple of years ago the CEO hired a general manager for this organization. And about a month after this general manager was hired, I met with the CEO and we talked about how the GM was doing. And the CEO was very unhappy. The guy is not in sync with me. He is not out there addressing the needs that the field has. Our priorities seem to be different. We always seem to be on a different page about what's important. These were the kinds of things that the CEO told me about this new GM. He was kind of unhappy. So I started to talk to him a little bit further. What kinds of conversations have you had with this gentleman? What kinds of feedback have you provided? Have you had a lot of good dialogue? And the answer was, well, we've been so busy, so many new projects going, that I haven't had a lot of face time with the guy. So he and I figured out fairly quickly that the performance issue was the fact that this general manager was not given the definition of success. Expectations were not clear. What the owner and CEO wanted was not made explicit for him to succeed. And that's the case in about, when you survey employees, in about half the cases. Less than half of our employees feel that they understand what their direct manager expects of them. When those same companies were surveyed and we surveyed the managers, over 80% of the managers felt that they were clear with their expectations. So there's even a disconnect as to whether or not we're sharing the expectations, much less the expectations themselves. The first step in clear and compelling expectations is giving them their why. A lot of us have seen the video that Simon Sinek does, The Power of Why, Start with Why. And that's a very, very important concept. And I don't care if you're managing a high-level executive or an entry-level employee, they've got to know why their job matters. What is it that they do that impacts the mission of that company? How do they impact a higher purpose? And sometimes that higher purpose may be how they make their teams, their other departments, their fellow employees successful, how they impact those internally. Sometimes the mission is more external. They're helping communities, people, customers, clients outside the organization, and sometimes their why is a mix of internal and external. But people need to wake up in the morning, and when they're going to work, or these days logging on to work, they've got to know why what they spend the next 8-10 hours doing matters. And we've got to connect them with their why in order to do that. That's the first step when it comes to expectations. The next step is to get explicit. Love this quote. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. Again, managers think they've been clear. They think they've been explicit. They think there's a shared understanding of what is expected from their people, but their people are still saying they don't understand in about half the cases. So we've got to get really, really specific, almost uncomfortably explicit with people and make sure they get it. One of the easiest ways to create shared understanding of what success is to have a very simple conversation that goes something like, when I write your performance review, or when you get your report card, when you get your evaluation, your review, whatever your company or your organization may call it. If you're a small business, maybe you're not even doing performance reviews. But when I evaluate you as an employee and I give you a grade or an evaluation or a review, this is the criteria that you will be evaluated on. This is what your report card or your employee evaluation will contain. So if you want to know what's on the test, I'll tell you right now, I'm going to give you a copy of the test. We're going to tell you in advance what success looks like, how you score high. That way we get really specific about results, outcomes, how my performance as an employee will be measured, and what our shared understanding of success in my job is. Now, one of the difficult things about this year is that some of those definitions and some of those metrics have changed. So we have to be nimble and we have to adapt our measurements and definitions of success with our employees so that we're keeping them in the loop as things change. So we've got to be reasonably flexible and adaptable during this particular period, as always, but more so in 2020, so that as the priorities change, we're keeping our employees in the loop. So practice number one, be extraordinarily explicit with expectations. Number two, empowerment. Once we've told them what the expectations are, then we've got to ask them what they need to achieve those expectations. At this point in the conversation, we want to focus on the results. We want to focus on what the person needs to achieve rather than micromanaging the how. What we want to do with employees to truly empower them is to be almost make the results almost non-negotiable. These are the results that you've got to produce, but I'm going to allow you, within reason, to be self-governing in how you achieve them. And once we allow you that flexibility and that autonomy, then at this point in the conversation with the employee, an effective leader stops talking. They ask a question and then they shut up. And the question is, what do you need to succeed? What do you need to produce those results? Sometimes it's training. Sometimes it's development. Sometimes it is access to people or other teams. Sometimes it's information. Sometimes it's tangible. It may be equipment or resources. It's going to be different depending on the employee and the company. And it may ebb and flow with the industry or the time economically that we're in. In fact, one of the things that people this year, when you interview employees, when you talk to employees about what they need most from their boss in 2020, it was that the boss took an interest and invested in their well-being. Employee wellness is directly connected to employee performance. This year has created record, unprecedented levels of anxiety, depression, feelings of isolation, and loneliness among our workforce members. And employers have a role to understand what's going on in the minds of their employees and to address those things to the extent that they're going to impact their work. I have a client that is a manufacturing company, and they saw real declines in quality, in defect rates, even in employee absenteeism and workplace injuries in April, May, and in June. And what they learned was that their employees were really struggling with mental health issues, with severe anxiety. In some cases, employees talking about suicide. And these managers were not prepared or trained on how to help these employees. And we have a responsibility to know what to do when that happens, when our employee comes to us. And this particular company kind of revamped and upgraded their employee assistance program to give people access to counseling and resources to help them. But that's just an interesting and sometimes misunderstood example of one of the things that our employees need from their employer, from their boss. If the person is struggling, the employee will be struggling. And we've got to make sure that we're giving people what they need to be able to succeed in their job. Number 3. So remember, number 1 was be clear and explicit with expectations. Number 2, give people what they need to succeed and achieve those expectations. Now, number 3, we've got to keep the dialogue open with our people about what strong performance is and what strong performance is not. Most managers are not good at this, and it is a profoundly powerful tool. Again, the whole basis of what I'm talking about today is what do highly effective leaders do differently than everybody else? And one of the consistent practices that they engage in is they have regular, structured, dedicated performance management meetings with their people, one-on-one performance management meetings. And when things are crazy and employees are struggling and goals are changing, this ongoing dialogue with people becomes even more critical. That we've got to stay responsive and nimble in how we provide feedback. There are some elements of highly effective feedback. So when we're talking to an employee, we've got to make sure, first of all, that what we're giving them feedback on, what we're reviewing or evaluating or providing feedback on, matches up with what we originally said were our expectations for them. So what we do in this step, giving feedback, needs to sync up, line up with what we said their original expectations were. We've all had the experience, or certainly I have had, and I know a lot of people I talk to, most people I've talked to have had the experience of getting a review on criteria that they didn't know was important, and certainly wasn't what their boss originally told them was the definition of their boss. We've got to line the feedback up with the original expectations set forth. Number two, we've got to stop the madness, stop the day-to-day roar of operational and day-to-day tasks, activities, problems, fire drills, and sit down and have a one-on-one meeting or Zoom call with our employees to provide them with that feedback. We need to do that at least once a quarter, if not once a month. And this doesn't have to be an extraordinarily long meeting, but we need to have our employees, we owe it to them to give them one-on-one feedback on a regular basis that's meaningful, so that they have an opportunity to reconfirm how they're doing, and we have an opportunity to make sure we still understand what they need to succeed. Number four, when our employees do a good job, we've got to recognize them. One of the rookie moves of ineffective leaders is that they only give feedback when something gets screwed up. Okay? Only time I hear from my boss is when he's upset about something, when I blow it. Okay? Don't hear from him for the 98 things that I did right, but boy, he will not miss it when I drop the ball a couple times. Rookie move on the part of the manager. When people knock it out of the park, we've got to be there to celebrate that with them. And the joke that I always tell is that people are just like dogs, okay? When a dog does the right thing, we give them a treat. When a dog does the wrong thing, we give them punishment. Human beings have motivational reinforcement systems just like animals do. Human beings tend to repeat behaviors that are positively reinforced. Human beings tend to reduce the frequency of behaviors that are negatively reinforced. So when somebody does it right, catch them in the act of doing it right and celebrate that with them. That will increase the probability that that employee will repeat that positive, that desired behavior. By the same token, when they blow it, do not avoid that conversation. Let them know when they make a mistake. Let them know when they drop the ball. And don't sugarcoat it, and don't get all vague and uncomfortable about it. Tell the employee, listen, this particular project or task or activity or outcome or behavior isn't acceptable. It's not going to work. Do not beat around the bush when we have to give corrective or constructive feedback. And make sure that when we do give corrective feedback, that we're giving them a game plan on how to fix it. Okay? Where do I go from here? So that's wrong. Let's make sure they know how to do it right next time. Give them useful takeaways so that they can correct the behavior and improve the performance next time. And lastly, you've got to stay nimble. We've got to adapt our feedback and our performance management discussions and dialogue with people in a way that's relevant, timely, and current. And that was never more important than this year, because it's a fluid situation. It's a dynamic situation. Companies, their metrics, their priorities, their customers are changing. So, number three, talk frequently and effectively about performance. Last behavior, the last thing that highly effective leaders do differently than everybody else is accountability. Now, let's review the first three. Number one, clear expectations. I've told you what I need you to do, and I've been very, very explicit about it. Number two, I've asked you to tell me what you need to be able to deliver on those expectations. Number three, we've had ongoing discussions about what was right, what we need to get better at, and what the action plan should be. If I've done my job as a manager all the way through those first 3 steps, and you as the employee are still not able to perform at the level that we've agreed is successful, I've got to address that. Okay? Otherwise, we are a hostage. And a hostage is someone who can't leave, who's no longer in control. Okay? I have a client that's been a client for a long time, and they are in the professional services realm. And this particular, the owner of this organization had an office manager. And this office manager was primarily in charge of overseeing the employees, supervising the support staff, and being kind of the overseer of the teams. Unfortunately, nobody really liked this lady. She did not get along well with most of her employees. People kind of ran the other way when they saw her coming down the hall. And it reached a point where she was not able to effectively manage people. And the owner, the principal, had to intervene. And so we talked about what to do and how can we correct the situation. And what the principal of this firm finally decided is, I'm just going to have to sit in on any meetings that she has with our employees. I'm going to have to make sure I'm there for any kind of reprimands, reviews, any employee meetings where she's going to be talking to an employee. I got to make sure I'm there so that she doesn't alienate people. So who's running the show now? Okay. This poor owner of this business now has to sit in and protect his employees from the general manager that he hired, from the office manager that he hired. The tables are completely flipped here. And what happened in this particular case with this company is we talked a little bit further about, okay, is that really the best strategy? And long story short, we put a coaching program in place for this office manager. We tried to work on the skills that she needed to better interact with people. And after a time, she decided, you know what, this job's not for me. It wasn't a fit. And we orchestrated a very positive and very orderly transition out. She went and found another career in another industry doing something else where she was successful. And this firm brought in somebody else who could interact with people. But we had to confront the poor performance. We had to hold her accountable for what success was. Most managers are not good at this particular skill, or if they are, they're not doing it. And employees need it. They want it. They need and want accountability. Otherwise, the inmates are running the asylum. And let's talk about how that looks. We've all been here. I know I have been here, where I've got an employee who's not able to measure up, and my mindset is I can fix them. I can change them. All right. If I put together some little systems, and I can just, if I make sure they don't have to do any math or interact with, customers, and I put up some barriers and some walls, and I try to make it so that we, kind of leverage their unique gifts and protect them from the things they don't do well. And it's just a recipe for becoming a hostage. Then, the employee is running the show. The employee is managing the boss, not vice versa. Being in denial about people, how and when employees will change, is a real problem. Sometimes there's just a bad fit. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It means that there is not a good fit with the particular job that they're in. Second thing that we often get caught up in when we are afraid to hold people accountable is being afraid of losing them. This person is so talented. This person is invaluable. There's no way I'll be able to replace her. It would be an absolute nightmare. There aren't those kinds of people out there. The labor market is terrible. It's so hard to find good people, especially people that have her skill set, her technical training, okay? And so as a result, we keep the person because we're afraid of what things would be like if we lost them. At the end of the day, my clients joke with me about a quote from Napoleon, who said that the graveyard is full of indispensable men. Nobody's indispensable. Nobody is irreplaceable. Okay? We can, and again, who's the hostage? Who's running the show? Who can't leave? The boss, because the boss has got to make sure that they keep this person happy, okay? And that they don't ruffle their feathers so that they leave the boss high and dry. And that is the exact opposite position that the boss wants to be in. You combine those two elements with avoidance, the discomfort with having tough conversations. We don't like, oftentimes, most people don't like telling employees that they're not doing a good job. And what do humans do when they are contemplating something that they don't like doing? They find a way not to do it. We procrastinate. We put it off. We don't have the meeting. We hope it's going to get better. And we avoid the problem. And what happens when you avoid a problem of this type is the problem grows and mutates and starts to become less and less solvable and less controllable. Poor performance does not improve by ignoring it. It gets worse. So, at the end of the day, the manager has to be the manager. We're not helping people by keeping them in a job where they're not succeeding. We're not helping our employees by keeping them in jobs where they're failing. We need to be honest and fair and straightforward with people and take an up or out management approach, up or out. We either need to manage your performance up or we need to manage you out. Now, this is after we've done the first 3 steps of this process, the first 3 practices effectively well. We've got to hold people accountable. I've got a ton of resources on how to have those tough conversations, how to have difficult, uncomfortable meetings with employees when you've got to hold them accountable. Feel free to email me or call me if you want those. But the first and foremost step that we've got to take is being willing to have the tough conversation and hold people accountable for success. So to recap, what do effective leaders do differently than everybody else? What was important before this pandemic, but now absolutely vital as we see engagement levels plummeting? And what we've learned is that the stuff that worked before still absolutely works. It's just more critical. Being explicitly, almost uncomfortably clear about what the definition of success is and how that success will be measured and evaluated. Getting to the point in the conversation where after the expectations are clear, that we as a manager just stop talking and let the employee tell us what they need to succeed. Number 3, having ongoing 2-way effective dialogue about performance so that they continue to get better and better and better. And number 4, if we've done 1 through 3 effectively and consistently, we've got to make sure that we hold people accountable, that we put structure and integrity into our company, and that we're honest and forthright with people. So these are the things that highly effective leaders do differently. There ain't rocket science on that screen. There is nothing difficult or complex in these 4 practices. What I have found is that most people get it. They just don't do it consistently. Sometimes management is disciplining yourself to spend your time on the activities and behaviors that produce consistent success. And sometimes those behaviors are very fundamental and very straightforward, but they deal with human psychology and they deal with creating predictable, repeatable results from people. And those require us to stay focused on the fundamentals. So I appreciate everyone listening to me, and I'm going to click out of that share and answer any questions that we might have.
Thank you, Doug, for that. I know I definitely learned a lot, so I appreciate that. We did have quite a few questions come in, so I'm going to go through them as quickly as I can. Again, I wanted to make sure that you all know to submit your questions via the Q&A button. To find it, hover over any of our faces, click the Q&A, and then go ahead and ask your questions. So some of you have sent it through chat, but I've got them, so thank you so much. Okay, the first question, and I believe you may have covered this early on, but this person is asking, how do we know if we're leading a disengaged organization?
Great question. And the kind of the cool answer is that it's easy and relatively cheap to do a survey. What I would recommend, if we don't know, if we don't have our finger on the pulse of that organization, is to do a survey. And a lot of people are thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to, that might ruffle feathers, or people might wonder why. And sometimes there's trepidation about doing an employee engagement survey or employee satisfaction survey, but they're a best practice. They are absolutely a best practice. There are some great companies out there that do exceptional surveys. Gallup does one for $15 an employee. So if you have 10 employees, it's $150, and you can do the math from there. And there are free ones. If nothing else, worst case scenario, SurveyMonkey has some tested surveys to measure employee engagement. First step, do a survey.
Great, thank you, Doug, and thank you to that person that submitted that question. The next question is, what do we do if we know our management peers are disengaged?
What do we do if we know they're disengaged?
Yeah, I think this person might be asking if their peers are the ones that are disengaged.
Right.
How do they address that?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, a lot of times these practices are they are lateral practices. The same things that work with an employee work with a peer, a colleague, or our boss. For that matter, they work with our kids and our spouses. Being clear with our expectations, telling people what we need from them. If your department and my department have to work together, and you as a manager of your department are disengaged, and it's impacting my department or it's impacting our company as a whole, I want to sit down and talk to that person. And I want to let them know what I need from them, what the company needs from them, and give them respectful and honest feedback about that. Maybe they are in a place, a lot of times disengaged managers are in a place where the blame is completely external. They are looking to the company or the CEO or the marketplace to fix their problems, and they're not owning their role in both developing their own engagement, but the engagement of other people. And the first step is to sit down and just, have take that person out for a cup of coffee or a milkshake and have an honest conversation with them about what's going on, and see if you can reach an understanding about what that person is going through, and how you as a colleague might be able to assist them in changing the situation. Now, part two of the answer is going to be at some point, if Will and I both report to Mary Beth, if we will both work and we have the same boss, and Will can't get me to get it in gear, and I'm impacting his department, at some point after talking with me, Will may need to go to Mary Beth and talk to her about what do we do. We all succeed or fail together. Let's try to figure out a situation so we can help Doug and his team out. But I would wait I would wait until you go direct. Going direct is always the best approach first. Sometimes you might need to escalate, but if we can keep that as kind of our last tool, it's usually going to be better received.
Thank you, Doug, and I appreciate I was the positive example in your reference. So
I
thank you.
didn't switch them, Will.
I appreciate that. We got a couple of the questions again. I want to encourage everyone to please ask your questions. Your time. This is your time to ask Doug anything. This one is pretty much a yes or no question. Will this content be available after the webinar? So I'll answer that one. So this YouTube video will be, rather, this video will be uploaded to YouTube after the fact for those of you that are attending and or want to share with other chamber members. So this will be available after the fact. Um, Now, the next question is somewhat timely, and this person is asking, work from home or WFH seems to be the hottest trend. Obviously, what are some of the best practices for engagement for those at home due to the COVID circumstances?
Yeah, great question. And as you said, complete. We are right in the middle of that. And first thing, this, and it's the premise of my talk is the stuff that was important before now is more important. So staying in touch with our people is critical. Providing ongoing FaceTime, even if that FaceTime is virtual, on a regular one-on-one basis with people, and that may be a formal performance management meeting, or it may just be a phone call to let that employee know you're thinking about them. Do you need anything? So staying in touch and remembering that our employees are going through a lot of psychological difficulties right now. A lot, the sense of isolation and loneliness that has resulted from remote working, especially for those personalities that are more extroverted, is very difficult. Introverts like me, when they said stay home and work on a computer, I'm like, you know, but I've got a lot of people I work with who thrive on the social interaction at the workplace. And this was very tough on them to say, sit in your home and you can talk to me on a camera. And those people need extra contact, extra connection. Now, as things loosen up as far as the economy and our ability to move about is occurring within the government, within our governor's recommendations and within the rules of your company, to the extent that we can have other types of interaction, we want to encourage that as well when you can do it safely. But number one, management fundamentals such as being clear, having frequent conversations, and staying in touch and making sure people know that you got their back is still critical. And being just sensitive to the fact that people are a little bit edgy right now, especially those that don't do well without a lot of social connection. So giving them a little bit of extra understanding and a little bit of extra investment in their well-being and wellness is critical.
Thank you, Doug. You mentioned the extrovert portion. I'm definitely the extrovert. I love the feeding off other people's energies, especially when we're doing presentations. So I've had to quickly adjust to be able to read the room, so to speak, whenever we do things like this or run meetings on Zoom. And it's very difficult. It takes it
Yeah.
takes a lot of practice, but nonetheless, I thank you for your answer. So this question just got submitted, and I'm risking the fact that it may be an inside joke. I'm going to ask it anyway, because Doug, I know that you sent it out to some of your clients as well. This person is asking, who was the best guitarist of all time?
Oh, what a great question. And I'm going to have to go with Stevie Ray Vaughan. I don't know if he was the best, but he was certainly my favorite. And a lot of people are going to say Hendrix, but I'm going to go with Stevie Ray. So there you go.
That's a good choice.
let's Will, you and me, we're going to find out who submitted that question, and we're going to make sure we identify that.
Oh, don't worry. I've got
Yeah.
first, last name, IP address. I get it all. So
Excellent, excellent.
all right. So we do have somebody that did ask another question here. Just came in. What can you do when you're saddled with a hierarchy of weak managers who are poor decision makers, lack leadership skills, and label all feedback and introduction to discussion as insubordination? Wow, that's a thank you to that person that submitted that.
Would you repeat that one? There was a lot of data in there.
It was, and lots of yes, a lot of data. So this question again says, what can you do when you are saddled with a hierarchy of weak managers who are poor decision makers, lack leadership skills, and label all feedback and introduction to discussion as insubordination?
Right. Well, I guess the first question I've got for that person is who are they in the organization? Do they work for these managers? Are they one of these managers? Or are they the CEO of the boss of these managers? Depending on who they are and where they are in the company, their answer is going to be different. Um, I've got clients right now that, as we said, are going through a time where morale and employee satisfaction and engagement are at an all-time low, and and a lot of times people are making kind of dramatic moves as a result of this. They're having conversations that maybe aren't turning out very well. They're job hunting. They're doing things that are to an extent reactionary. So the first thing I would do is take a breath. Um, Acknowledge and understand that we are going through a pretty crazy time. And sometimes things get better on their own. Sometimes things will improve as the stress and tension of the pandemic lifts. And sometimes it doesn't. But take a breath and make sure you realize that we don't have to react and do something about it right this second. Sometimes there's just going to be ebbs and flows. If you're an employee, though, that works for an organization and you don't feel like the culture is supportive or functional or the management team is there for you, you ultimately have to make a decision. If you can't change that culture from the inside, maybe it's not for you. Maybe that organization is not a good fit for you. And So I have a couple different answers. So that's if you're an employee. Take a breath and try to find gratitude and find positivity, and have a little patience. If you're a manager who can change it, or if you're an employee who can't change it, maybe you've got to look around and consider other opportunities. If you're a manager, especially the higher you are in the organization, and you see a cultural problem, a cultural breakdown, it's on you to be the solution. Sometimes this pandemic exposed weaknesses that were already there in some cases. So cultures that were extraordinarily healthy didn't all of a sudden just get bad because of COVID. There were probably already some cracks in the system. And if this made things worse, and we're seeing managers who are disengaged, can't provide effective feedback, can't make decisions, we as managers, if we are in a management position, especially the higher we are in the organization, it's incumbent upon us to do those surveys, get that data, gather our employees together, gather our managers together, and find out what's going on and how we change that culture. Because employee engagement, as I said, morale, satisfaction, those aren't just about having a happy workplace. They are absolutely drivers of performance. Engagement and performance are directly linked. So if you've got the power in that organization to change the culture or impact the culture, you do have to own that to the degree that you can impact it.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that answer, and especially, this kind of goes back to I think the second question that was asked as well, to have those direct conversations, and I think in this case they may have had it. So, thank you for answering that question. That brings us to the end of all the questions. I'm looking at some of them. Someone is poking fun at you that Stevie Ray Vaughan is your favorite guitarist, but you have a Mark Knopfler and his guitar is on our poster behind you. So, man, there's a lot of astute people. That's why I have a virtual background so you don't see what's what's behind me. uh, Nonetheless, Doug, I wanted to thank you so much for jumping on this webinar with us. For those that may not be introduced to you, how can they get a hold of you?
Just give me a call. And I'll tell you right now, my direct number, 702-379-6524. Or feel free to email me, Doug at thebeckley.group.com.
Thank you so much. And I posted your phone number in there as well in chat box if you wanted to go ahead and grab that. Doug, I want to thank you again for joining us. It's very enlightening, everything you talk about. I mean, it's now more important than ever that we brush up on these leadership skills, because even when things return back to normal, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of strategies, especially work from home, that are still deployed within the organizations. So with that, I want to thank the chamber members that were on this call. Again, this content will be available to you, uploaded to YouTube at a later time, and we'll be sending out via the newsletter. Doug, thank you again. Thank you to all our chamber members for joining us, and have a
Thank
happy
you, Will.
Wednesday. Alrighty, bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye now.